The quarterback position may be deeper than we've ever seen at the NFL level before. So from a fantasy perspective, is that going to make setting our lineup easier, or is it going to be just that much more difficult trying to find the right quarterback every week? Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Welcome into my quarterback start and sit analysis for week 1 of the NFL season. We've already dropped all the other positions for start and sit at this point: running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. If you've watched any of those videos, hit the like button right now so we can show YouTube our community continues to come back strong in all of our videos. But if you're new here, you can save your like till the end, and let me go ahead and give you a quick breakdown on how these videos work and how you should be utilizing them to set your lineup. Every single matchup analysis starts with a defensive rating. We're going to be taking a look at the defense that these players will be going up against, and we want to know 3 things: how many fantasy points, how many yards, and how many touchdowns does that defense allow to that position. And the key will be right on screen for every single matchup, so you can see exactly how tough that defense may be that week. And just so you know, if you see an eggplant, that means it's an awesome matchup. But then we also go ahead and designate a risk score to every single player as well. Are they low risk? Are they medium risk? Or are they high risk? At that point, it doesn't necessarily mean that a high risk player is just going to be a sit. It just means that based on several different key factors for that matchup, that player could have more risk than somebody else that has a much safer floor that week. It's all about finding out the variables for each player, and then you can take a look at your lineup, your roster settings, your scoring settings, and your matchup for the week and try to determine, am I okay to play a safe player right now, or do I need to risk it for the biscuit and go with somebody with a little bit more risk? And if one of the top players in the league is listed as a risky start that week, it doesn't mean you put them on your bench. It just means you might want to caution what you do with the rest of your lineup, because that guy could end up having a really low floor but a really high ceiling to go with it. But hopefully you all understand exactly what the videos are supposed to be doing. Enough of the explanations. Now it's time for the analysis. Thursday Night Football, the defending Super Bowl champions welcome in the Baltimore Ravens. Thursday Night Football, Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes. I don't care about the defenses. I don't care about it being Thursday Night Football. I'm giving both of these guys a low risk score this week. For Lamar Jackson, it's all about what he does in 2 separate portions of the game: through the air and on the ground. And we know that he can run the football. In Kansas City's defense last year was inside the top 10 of fewest fantasy points, passing yards, and passing touchdowns allowed. But they ranked 10th for most rushing yards allowed to the quarterback position. Lamar has a stable floor this week. Likely he'll pick up some yards on the ground, he'll do some good things through the air, and by the end of the week, he'll be one of the best scoring quarterbacks in all of football. And for Patrick Mahomes, I'm excited to see what the added speed on the outside will do to help open up this offense. I don't care if Xavier Worthy has 0 targets, 0 receptions, 0 yards this week. His speed alone on the outside is more than enough to open things up for the run game, for Rashee Rice, and for Travis Kelce. I am definitely on board with Patrick Mahomes potentially having a career year in 2024. And also, Kansas City lost their home opener last season, and not that it means a whole lot now. I really don't think they want to do that again this year. I think they're coming out with a chip on their shoulder. They want to start the three-peat run right in week 1. Green Bay and Philadelphia kick off in Brazil on Friday Night Football. That's weird to say, but both quarterbacks in this matchup, once again, will be bringing a low risk rating for me. Philadelphia's secondary last season, especially towards the end of the year, was trash, but they have done a lot this offseason to revamp that secondary and make it way stronger, and it should be. Because of that, this matchup may not be as easy for Jordan Love as what it indicates on screen, but we're using last year's stats for that. Jordan Love should still end up having a solid game though. And for one of those reasons, it's because Philadelphia should also have a solid game. And if Philadelphia's offense is moving the football, then so will Green Bay's offense. And this could end up being a shootout in Brazil that fantasy owners would love to see. Green Bay's defense last year was pretty darn good against the quarterback position, but Jalen Hurts and this Philadelphia offense have a chip on their shoulder, and they're going to want to come out strong, especially after the way they absolutely collapsed in the second half of last season. Could Jalen Hurts have some up and down drives in this matchup? Absolutely, it could. We're also still wanting to see if they're going to be running that tush push as much as they used to. Does Jalen Hurts lose out on some of those rushing touchdowns because they go to Saquon Barkley now, or will he still get them with that play? That could be the difference here. But regardless of those question marks, Jalen Hurts is still one of the top quarterbacks in all of football. He's going to see some yards on the ground. This offense is definitely going to move the football this week, and he should still have a really, really safe floor. Nothing but low risk scores to start the video, but now I've got a matchup where I've got some worries about the quarterback position, starting with Russell Wilson. Really, it revolves around two questions for me. One, how often is Justin Fields used? Is he going to be put in at the quarterback position? Will they have him at other places? Will he be involved in trick plays, or will he not be on the field at all? Will they just leave him on the sideline and that's it? Russell Wilson's the starter. We're rolling with him. That's what we're going to do. Question number two is about Arthur Smith. What exactly is he going to do with this offense? Is he going to be game planning a lot better than he did for Atlanta last year? I would hope so, given the fact that he's going into Atlanta facing the team that just fired him in week 1. I would want to show off my new offense as much as possible, but that's just me. Those are the big two questions about Russell Wilson this week. So for me, he's going to have a high risk rating until we know more about exactly how is this offense going to be structured, exactly how is this offense going to operate, and exactly how often will Russell Wilson be taken off the field to let Justin Fields get in on some plays as well. I know people are really excited about Kirk Cousins being in Atlanta, and I guarantee some of you are not going to agree with this high risk rating, but let me explain why real quick before you disagree. My biggest concern about Kirk Cousins coming off an Achilles injury is, does he feel good enough to move around in the pocket? And it's not just from a physical standpoint, it's from a mental standpoint as well. When you have that type of an injury, it takes you a while to get comfortable again, making those sudden movements, moving up in the pocket, getting out of the pocket, running when you need to, extending the play. And now you've got TJ Watt and the rest of the Pittsburgh defense across from you. That can be an issue. And if it is, Kirk Cousins could see some of that rust in week 1 show up, and he could be very inconsistent because of it. I like Kirk Cousins in this offense, and I think he's going to have a fine year. But for week 1, with a tough matchup and not seeing him move in a game-like setting yet, we do need to be very, very careful about how tough it could be for him. For Arizona and Buffalo, we could see some dynamic plays made on the ground for both of these quarterbacks. Now, Kyler Murray for me this week does get a medium risk, but he's actually a lot closer to being a low risk than he is even in the middle of the medium risk category for me. I just want to see how is he going to operate with his new weapon there, Marvin Harrison Jr. Buffalo's defense is no slouch either, and it's going to be on the road, so there are some contributing factors to saying, hey, Kyler Murray this week could have a decently high ceiling, but his floor could be a little unstable as well, knowing that it is a tougher matchup, and he may still be working with Marvin Harrison Jr. on that connection. Last season, Buffalo's defense, pretty darn good against quarterbacks, except they did allow quite a few rushing yards to them. Kyler Murray getting outside of the pocket and picking up some yards with his feet this week, which would help bring his floor up, making that medium risk score that you see there much less concerning than what you may be thinking right now. Kyler Murray has top 12 potential all over him. Josh Allen, on the other hand, should be saddled up for a pretty big week. Whether it be on the ground or through the air, Josh Allen should get off to a really good start here in 2024. I like his ability to move the ball on the ground, and likely he will be with a lot of new weapons that he's going to be relying on. If that connection timing quite isn't there as of yet, he's probably going to get himself outside the pocket and pick up some yards on the ground. The connection with Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox, that should be super solid. Keon Coleman could really be the biggest factor here, though. If he comes out and has a huge day, obviously that means Josh Allen did as well, and that means his ceiling was even higher. If they have trouble connecting, though, that ceiling probably comes down a little bit, but Josh Allen will spread the ball around, he'll still get his, and you'll still have a solid day for your fantasy team. For the Chicago and Tennessee matchup, I want to take a quick second to address my thoughts on the Tennessee defense, because there were a ton of comments on the wide receiver video asking me why I thought Tennessee may still not be that good. Now, yes, I did say that Tennessee's defense last year was garbage, especially in the secondary. But I also said that there were some improvements made this season. L'Jarius Sneed obviously was a huge get for Tennessee, and they've made some changes in the secondary as well to try and strengthen it. But I don't know if it's as elite as what some people are making it out to be, especially when you face an offense like the Chicago Bears that not only have 3 really good wide receiver options, but also have a good receiving option at the tight end position and a good receiving option out of the backfield in DeAndre Swift. It is only week 1. It may take a little bit of time for this Tennessee defense to really get on the same page with all of the new parts and a new defensive coordinator. Could they be a lot better later on in the season? Absolutely. But I still think this week for this matchup, their secondary isn't going to be as strong as what Tennessee fans would really hope for. And because of that, I still think we're going to see a pretty decent week out of the Chicago Bears. But that's part of the reason why I gave Caleb Williams a medium risk score this week, because that secondary is improved and because of Jeffrey Simmons in the middle of that defensive line. Even though I think DJ Moore and Keenan Allen are going to get theirs this week, have a really nice floor and a really nice game, that doesn't mean that the Titans won't make things difficult on Caleb Williams. But Caleb Williams is a master at getting outside the pocket, extending plays, and improvising. And when you have to keep an eye on that many wide receivers, Moore, Allen, Odunze, tight ends, Kmet, Everett, Swift in the backfield, someone's going to get away at some point in time, especially within a secondary that is still learning to play together. And that could lead to some really good days for the wide receivers. Even if Caleb Williams has an okay day and doesn't really flash the upside that we will see at some point this season. Will Levis definitely has a lot more risk for me on the road at Chicago this week because he lives and dies by the deep pass. He could be a top 12 quarterback. He could finish outside the top 24. His range of outcomes all season long will be very, very wide. And some weeks it's going to be really difficult to tell exactly what we're going to get from him. Right now, as of this recording, Brian Callahan seems to think that DeAndre Hopkins will be fine for week 1. But there's been no definitive answer as of yet, and we don't know exactly how healthy DeAndre Hopkins may be. He's still going to be questionable probably leading into the game, and we'll update this in the rankings later in the week if things start to change and we hear one way or another. As of right now, it sounds like Hopkins will be good to go. But if Will Levis is looking for the deep ball, that's something that Chicago did a good job of limiting last year. They keep plays in front of them. They don't let wide receivers get open behind them. They come up and they make the tackles. Calvin Ridley could have a tough day because of that. But Will Levis, if he's not able to find someone open consistently down the field, he's going to be looking for Hopkins over the middle of the field, which would leave him with a really low ceiling and a floor that, again, will need to be adjusted based on how many big plays and how many touchdowns he can find. If you find yourself in a position where you're starting Jacoby Brissett this week, then I have to apologize to you in advance because you wouldn't love anything that I have to say about him anyway. The only reason Brissett should even be considered is if you play in a 2-quarterback or a super flex league and you really don't have any other options. Outside of that, there's no reason to even be risking it with Brissett. Now, Joe Burrow is a medium risk for me right now. As of this recording, there is some doubt that Ja'Marr Chase may even play this week. Now, by the time this video comes out, Ja'Marr Chase could say, yep, I'm good to go, I'm playing, and then it wouldn't matter. So let me cover both scenarios for you. First off, doesn't matter whether or not Ja'Marr Chase plays, the New England defense is really good. They're going to get after Joe Burrow, and this is really first full game live action since he hurt his wrist last season. How is it going to hold up for an entire game? Those will be some question marks that will be answered this week. If Chase does play, obviously it helps Joe Burrow. He still stays a medium risk for me because of the fact that this is a good New England defense, and there'll still be some concerns about the wrist injury. Now, if for some reason Ja'Marr Chase comes in and says, yep, I'm playing, I'm good to go, he would move a little bit closer to being a low risk for me. If this was a better matchup against a worse defense, Joe Burrow would be all lights green for me this week. There are some things that we need to consider that could mess with his floor and ceiling, though, and give us a wide range of outcomes. I absolutely love the Houston-Indianapolis matchup in Week 1. Two of the best young quarterbacks in the NFL from last year's draft. We have C.J. Stroud, the Rookie of the Year winner, and Anthony Richardson, who everyone knows is uber talented. But after missing basically the entire year with an injury, what are we going to get from him, especially in the passing game, from a consistency standpoint? CJ Stroud is going to step on the football field this year with one of the best offenses in the league. And over on Underdog, I'm actually going to lock him into a pick'em to go over 1.5 passing touchdowns this week against the Indianapolis Colts. Last season, in 2 games against the Colts, he had 4 total touchdowns and 0 interceptions. 2 touchdowns in each game. Definitely see him finding the end zone at least twice this week going up against Indianapolis with a defense that's not really looked at as being extremely competitive, and he should be just fine taken care of. For Anthony Richardson, it's going to be all about his consistency in the passing game. There's going to be some rust, and he's going to have to get his timing back down. When he does, he'll be just fine. But Houston's defense is not going to be the easiest defense to figure that out against. Now, last year, Houston, their weakness was giving up some big plays in the passing game. They gave up quite a bit of passing yards, but they kept receivers, for the most part, out of the end zone. So that's where he could be limited this week. Richardson could have some big plays through the air, but how many times does he find the end zone through the air? We may have to rely on getting some touchdowns on the ground for Anthony Richardson to really hit his ceiling. Jacksonville and Miami has all the makings of a possible shootout. It also has all the makings of a big letdown by Trevor Lawrence and the Jacksonville offense. I mean, inconsistencies plagued Trevor Lawrence last season. One game, he would look like a superstar. The next game, he would throw some of the worst interceptions that we would see any quarterback throw last season. And because of that, it was really hard to gauge how good Trevor Lawrence was going to be on any given week. Miami's defense is still pretty solid, but we know their offense is going to put up a lot of points. And because of that, Trevor Lawrence is likely going to have to throw the football. If that happens and it starts to become a shootout, he's definitely going to have a pretty high ceiling this week. But the more times he has to throw the football, the more chances there are for interceptions. And that's where his inconsistencies would come into play. Regardless of any interceptions, I'm looking for Tua to have a big day still. And I'm going to head on over to Underdog right now, and I'm going to put in a ticket taking the over on his 266.5 passing yards. Last season, the Jacksonville Jags allowed the 7th most fantasy points, passing yards, and passing touchdowns to the quarterback position. Tua, we know that this offense can absolutely blow up at any point in time. So I'm going to take him in this Miami offense to have a big week against Jacksonville in Week 1. Carolina has a new coaching staff, offensive-minded. Carolina did everything that they possibly could to upgrade their offense this offseason as well. Carolina is still in for a really tough day at New Orleans in Week 1. And that's why Bryce Young is going to be my Mando must-avoid this week for the quarterback position. Mando does everything they can to help you eliminate body odor, the same way I do everything I can to help you eliminate mistakes with your fantasy lineup. That's why Mando's clinically proven formula that can eliminate odors for up to 72 hours is my go-to during football season. And right now, if you head on over to Shop Mando and use code word headliners, you're gonna get $5 off of their starter pack, which is almost a 40% discount. And not only is Bryce Young my must avoid this week, but I'm also going to head on over to Underdog and put in a ticket with him to take the over on 0.5 interceptions. I definitely think he completes a pass to the opposing defense this week. Playing in New Orleans is not going to be an easy task. They added Chase Young. They still have Cameron Jordan there on the defensive line. And this is a defense that allowed the 9th fewest passing yards to opposing quarterbacks last season. Carolina has way better days ahead of them, but unfortunately, one of those days won't be this week. There may be a little bit of a misconception about how good Carolina was last year, because last season they were one of the best teams in all of football at stopping the pass. But that was essentially because nobody really needed to pass on them. Everybody ran the football, and now they don't have Brian Burns. This is definitely an opportunity for Derek Carr to get off to a strong start. It's also an opportunity for Derek Carr to show a lot of those inconsistencies that he had in this offense last season. Also, how often does Derek Carr come off the field to put Taysom Hill back there? Right now, for me, Derek Carr is going to be a high-risk start this week for a lot of reasons I just outlined. Not knowing how good Carolina's defense really is. How often do they run the football this week with Alvin Kamara? Can Carolina get after Derek Carr with no Brian Burns? Can Derek Carr limit the interceptions? Lots of question marks this week. Derek Carr could be a top 12 quarterback. He could also be a guy that barely finds his way into the top 24. Man, I tell you, if you're trying to run Sam Darnold and Daniel Jones out in your lineup week 1, I feel bad for you. I really do. For Sam Darnold, it isn't really the secondary of the Giants I'm worried about. It's the front 7 getting after him and taking him to the ground. I think he'll get more than enough passes off to give Justin Jefferson exactly what he needs this week, but I don't know if he's going to be able to find anything else after that. Sam Darnold, for me, is way too high of a risk to try and roll with. I would be completely out on Daniel Jones this week if it weren't for the fact that there's a lot of questions in the Minnesota secondary still, and Malik Nabers looks every bit of the elite wide receiver he was drafted to be. And Daniel Jones will likely face some pressure. The defensive line from Minnesota can still get after the quarterback. If he's able to get rid of the football and be accurate with at least Malik Nabers, he should be fine. And he'll probably use his feet a little bit as well this week and pick up some rushing yards, which gives him a much better floor. Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack are going to want to prove a point this week. This defense for the LA Chargers, when healthy, has an opportunity to be one of the better ones in football. Jesse Minter comes from a long line of Raven defensive coordinators that cause confusion and chaos for opposing offenses. I think Gardner Minshew is going to be in for a tough matchup against LA this week. There's just still too many question marks for Gardner Minshew right now. Will he be able to connect with Davante Adams on a consistent basis? Is Brock Bowers going to be the weapon that we've been promised? And will Zamir White be good enough to keep the pressure off the pass game? Lots of questions this week, and that's why, even though I like Davante Adams to have a good week, I don't like Gardner Minshew to have a high ceiling. Crosby and Wilkins may be one of the best rushing pairs in all of football, and they're going to make sure Justin Herbert knows that this week. But for me, it's not necessarily can Justin Herbert do a good job. It's going to be how much is he going to be asked to do? How often do they run the football? Do they push the ball down the field? Lots of different question marks here with the LA Chargers. The only thing we know is that they're definitely going to run the football. But are the weapons going to be good enough to help support Justin Herbert this week and give him the ceiling that you all would like? I know Denver fans are excited for Bo Nix, but Mike Macdonald is a stud play caller on defense. And even though Seattle's defense last year was bend but don't break, they gave up quite a bit of yards, they just didn't give up those scores as easily as some other defenses. But when one of the best defensive minds in all of football gets an opportunity to send his defense after a rookie quarterback at home in week 1, I'm staying away from that rookie quarterback, and I'll bet on the defense being better this week. To be fair, the matchup rating for Geno Smith against Denver looks really good, and the numbers from Denver last year are a little bit misconstrued. They were really, really bad because of a huge performance from Miami against them. But down the stretch, they were a whole lot better. They haven't done a whole lot to improve this offseason, and Patrick Surtain is really the guy there that is going to help shut things down. Likely, he's going to be matched up on DK Metcalf this week, and that's going to be a really tough matchup, especially if Geno Smith doesn't get back to some of that consistency he saw from 2022 instead of last year when unfortunately he seemed to be all over the place. The Dallas and Cleveland matchup has a possibility of being an absolute defensive slugfest. Last season, the Cleveland Browns defense allowed the fourth fewest fantasy points and passing yards to the quarterback position. They did give up a few too many passing touchdowns. But my worry isn't really about Dak Prescott this week. It's about everything around him because this offensive line is not nearly as good as it's been in the past. And their run game also not nearly as good as it has been in the past. You've still got CeeDee Lamb and you've still got Jake Ferguson. But this defense is absolute dynamic on the Cleveland side of the ball, and it could make life really tough for Dak Prescott in week 1. But for as worried as I am about Dak Prescott, I've even been more worried about Deshaun Watson. Yes, Cleveland lost their defensive coordinator, but they still return a lot of the same pieces. In fact, they're also getting back Trevon Diggs on the outside. For me, I just don't see the risk in trying to start Deshaun Watson against a really good defense when Deshaun Watson hasn't looked like an NFL caliber quarterback in quite some time. His upside just isn't there right now, especially in such a tough matchup. The Washington and Tampa Bay matchup could be a whole lot of fun to watch, basically because of Jayden Daniels. He's taking on a Tampa Bay defense that feels like they've subtracted more than they added, and that's from a defense that wasn't great against stopping the pass last season. They allowed the third most passing yards to quarterbacks last year, and Jayden Daniels absolutely has the arm to keep that going. Terry McLaurin could be in for a big day, but really Jayden Daniels' low risk rating comes from the fact that he's also going to add some yards on the ground, and finding the end zone on the ground could also be a very strong possibility in this matchup. Jayden Daniels' breakout season, here we come. Baker Mayfield should be able to pick up right where he left off last season. This Washington defense allowed the most passing yards, passing touchdowns, and fantasy points to the quarterback position. And outside of adding Dan Quinn, Washington hasn't done anything to really make their offense all that better. Give me Baker Mayfield to have a big day with top 12 potential. Matthew Stafford and Jared Goff get to do battle once again as the LA Rams come back to Detroit where their season ended just a few months ago. What are we going to see from Matthew Stafford this time around? Well, he's going to be looking at a brand new secondary from the Detroit Lions. It was laughable how bad they were at times last year. This year, they should be a whole lot better, but not good enough at this point to stop Matthew Stafford. He's definitely going to come in, not only with a chip on his shoulder to revenge what happened last season with that loss, but also to make up for the fact that the last time he walked into the stadium, Detroit absolutely annihilated him with the boos. I think we're going to see a warmer welcome this time as Detroit fans do truly appreciate how good Stafford was during his time there. But Stafford, he's definitely going to want to put up some numbers, and he still will be able to against this defense. Jared Goff at home in primetime is a lock. He doesn't have the highest ceiling of a lot of fantasy quarterbacks, but he does have one of the best floors of fantasy quarterbacks. Very rarely is he going to turn the ball over. Maybe every once in a while he has that game where you question what the world is going on, but for the most part, he takes care of the football at home, and Detroit plays much better in primetime than any other time. Detroit is going to be rocking for week 1 with the Rams coming back into town. Goff should have a really solid day, and he's not going to have to worry about Aaron Donald coming through the middle of that defensive line trying to take his head off. Week 1 wraps up with the New York Jets and the San Francisco 49ers on Monday Night Football. And I know everybody is excited to see Aaron Rodgers back on the field, especially those of us that have invested in Breece Hall or Garrett Wilson. But let me just caution you, it's a lot of the same concerns that I brought up earlier in the video with Kirk Cousins. He's going up against a solid defense. Nick Bosa is going to be coming for him. Fred Warner in the middle of that linebacker core is excellent. he's going to have to be able to move around. And when you're coming back from an Achilles injury, even if your body feels 100%, your mind still needs to get to the fact that the last time you tried to maneuver like that, you tore your Achilles. It's going to take some time for Aaron Rodgers to shake off that rust and get back to being his old self. And week 1 is going to be a really difficult task for him. He brings some risk concern for me because his floor could definitely be something that causes concern. However, he should still have a really solid ceiling this week with the weapons that he has around him. Well, the good news for Brock Purdy, he gets his left tackle back. Also, the good news, he gets one of his top wide receivers back. Also, everybody's healthy, even Christian McCaffrey. San Francisco is in a good position to have a solid week, but Brock Purdy is going to have a difficult one. Last season, the New York Jets allowed the fewest fantasy points to the quarterback position. So while they may run the crap out of the ball with Christian McCaffrey, Brock Purdy could find some inconsistencies, and he definitely could have a couple of turnovers that hurt his fantasy numbers overall. Headliner Nation, there you have it, my quarterback start and sit analysis for week 1 of the NFL season. Super excited to be back. And just like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, if you're new here and you haven't hit the like button yet and you appreciate this content and will be back for more, hit the like button once again. For now, Headliner Nation, that's going to do it for me this week. Jake will be here the rest of the week for our rankings, and then of course we'll be here on Saturday night for our live show. I'm going to get out of here now though. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.